Hello, hello together. Welcome to our webinar to the Ukraine crisis. And this webinar is the first webinar in a series of further events in preparation of actions against the NATO summit, which will take place in June in Madrid this year. My name is Kristine Karch, and I'm co-chair of the international network No to War, No to NATO. It was formed developing the joint actions against the 60-year summit of NATO 2009 in Strasbourg-Kehl. We organized there a two-day counter-summit, a peace camp, demonstrations, non-violent actions of civil disobedience, and blockades. The Strasbourg Appeal, which is unfortunately still actual, is a founding document of our network, which now consists of more than 350 organizations, initiatives, groups from over 42 countries. But we are not only on NATO summit since Strasbourg and every NATO summit which took place. Additionally, we are organized protest actions, webinars with international and national groups and seminars, like one in Gothenburg, Sweden, European security with EU and NATO, and had also a conference in Buenos Aires, peace, disarmament, and social alternatives to global NATO, and take part on the World Social Forum. The last was the virtual in January last year, where we had several workshops provided. And of course, we are preparing together with local and national initiatives to protest against the NATO summit in Madrid. One part is the international organization group called Peace Summit Madrid, which have a call against NATO and the demands to at least abolish NATO. And there's also a local group in Madrid. They call them OTAN No Madrid, and they have today evening a public event to present all the planned actions and activities against NATO. And they are also calling for the government of the state to leave NATO and fighting and demanding to abolish NATO and to get rid of the US bases. And of course, we will work together to have huge actions in Madrid. We'll have a peace summit and a counter summit and a common demonstration against NATO and other things else. And now I'm happy to have here you all in the webinar, and hope we will have a fruitful discussion, and hand over to Kate.
Thanks very much indeed, Christina, and thanks for introducing people to the work of the No to War, No to NATO network, which, as you say, has done very, very important work, and it continues to grow in strength as a network and a movement. So we hope that everyone here will get involved as we move towards the Madrid summit. Of course, our focus today is on the crisis in Ukraine. I hope you've all been able to see the statement that the network has produced. It goes into quite some depth, and obviously a chief focus is the impact of NATO expansion on Ukraine and on the region. So we'll be exploring those issues this evening. We're very fortunate to have a strong and expert panel, and particularly we're delighted to welcome two friends from Ukraine, who I will introduce shortly, but big welcome to Nina and to Yuri. Thanks for taking the time to join us today. But first of all, I'm going to turn to Reiner Braun from Germany. He's the Executive Director of the International Peace Bureau, very seasoned and expert activist in this arena. So, Reiner, if you could share your thoughts with us and particularly set some wider global context into what's happening in Ukraine. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Kate. And I think it's a great opportunity this evening to discuss the situation in Ukraine, above all to discuss and to see the unknown messages from Ukraine. You know, I wanted to start with a quote. It's from Kurt Tucholsky. I think everyone knows Kurt Tucholsky. And he said, nothing is harder and nothing requires more character than to be in open opposition to its time and to say loudly no. And I think it's time to say loudly no to war and war preparation, and to say loudly no to all the preparations which are done by the politicians and above all by the media. I want to use my 10 minutes for spreading some informations which you can partly read in some newspapers, but which are absolutely not the mainstream and what is often in the opposite to the mainstream. And I would start to thank, above all, Yuri and Nina for their courageous engagement in Ukraine, which is absolutely not easy. They are the really prominent peace fighters at that time. To some facts. All our mass media is speaking about the 100,000 or 120,000 Russian troops. No one, or quite no one, is speaking that they are 350 kilometers far away from the western borders and from the Ukraine borders. 350 kilometers. German troops, together with other foreign troops, are staying 150 kilometers far away from St. Petersburg, the historical capital of Russia and a very important historical city. And for me, it's a deep shame that against German troops, which were responsible for the killing of 2 million Leningrad people in the Second World War, are staying with troops 150 kilometers far away from these cities. Foreign troops in foreign countries are staying 150 kilometers far away. 2,000 new US troops are flying in these days to Romania. 1,000 more Western troops, Great Britain, Canada, and German, are coming to Lithuania and Estonia, to foreign countries. No one is speaking about that. And what is the background of these dangerous, most dangerous historical developments? Who is speaking about the NATO expansion to the east today? Remember the situation in 1990? And when we have a look to the documents and the archive, we found more and more information which together said the Western politicians agreed and said, yes, German unification, but no soldiers eastwards of the river Elbe. No foreign troops there. You can see this in the protocols of the discussion between Bush and Gorbachev. You can see this in the discussion between Baker and Genscher, between Kohl and Gorbachev. And you can see this politically in the Charter of Paris. The Charter of Paris, which described November 1990, a common, peaceful, united demilitarized Europe. And Kate is chairing the meeting. Maybe, Kate, you should have a look to the protocols of the summit of NATO in London in 1990, where it was proposed and discussed to change NATO, to change the security architecture of NATO to a consultant body. No one was speaking about NATO enlargement at that time, but they were planning it. But publicly, they were speaking of a new, united, demilitarized, peaceful, common security policy in Europe. But at the same time, and we know this now by the documents, in the NATO Strategic Center in Brussels, the first plans for the NATO enlargement were developed against the offers, against the will of the people. And these NATO enlarging NATO from 16 to 30 countries, occupying the whole East Europe to NATO, in opposition to the Charter of Paris, is for me the background of all these problems. And when we are discussing today and not mention the history of the last 30 years, I think we are not speaking fully the truth. But let me add some more points about the development of facts and arguments which are not mentioned in the public. 50% of the budget of Ukraine is spending for military purposes. Ukraine enlarged its troops at the border to the so-called People's Republics to 90,000 troops. On the other side, there were around 30,000. The United States give weapon support to Ukraine, 2.5 trillion of US dollars. Turkey sent drones, which were the most important weapon in the war between Armenia and Azerbaijan. Warships of NATO are moving in the Black Sea. The German general said, oh, we are in the minimum with 12 warships in the Black Sea. 2,000 US troops and US officers are in the Ukraine training the Ukrainian army. The Polish army will be developed from 130,000 people now to 200,000 people till 2030. Poland is one of the last countries in Europe which will fulfill the NATO obligation, spending 2.5% for military purposes. Lithuania, all the Baltic countries have new battalions of British, German, and Canadian troops. NATO battle groups are staying from the North Pole till to the south along the Russian border. In the last 5 years, we developed 2 new NATO headquarters, one in Poland and one in Latvia called Elbing and Adazi. We pushed 7 new air bases of the United States in Poland and the surrounding countries. The reality is there is a huge NATO troops concentration at the border to Russia with permanent maneuvers. Defender 20, 21, and 22 are only the big ones, but there are permanent maneuvers. And the next story we are reading day to day is Russia will attack Ukraine. And this means also NATO. Can you imagine that a country which is spending 65 billion for military purposes will attack a coalition like NATO, which is spending 1.1 trillion US dollar per year for military purposes? Or to say it from the economic side, Russia has the economic potential of 1/10 of the European Union. And that means the mouse will attack the elephant. These are some facts which were never mentioned or seldom mentioned in our news. We have the Minsk II agreement, which shows, and this is a sign of hope, a way to peace in the region. Who is not fulfilling the obligation? The first obligation is the new constitution in Ukraine with a federal system in Ukraine. Then elections in all parts of the Ukraine. and at the end, solving the border problem. The Ukraine government is not fulfilling any of these obligations. And the Normandy process is important because it's better to sit together and to discuss than to shoot, but having in mind that one side, what they should discuss when one side is never doing its homework. That is the reality of the situation. And let me say one final word to the analytic part, and then I will come to the end and make some suggestions how we can go forward in a positive way. For me, this whole situation in the Ukraine is so important because it's a part of the new geostrategic development in the world, the new power constellation in the world. And my imagination is that Ukraine, this confrontation in Ukraine has many things to do with China, with a new fight also to a new fight against China. In 2 points. First of all, Ukraine should be solved by the Europeans, but under the leadership of the United States. Because the United States want to be free to have more sources for the fight against China. And the second point is, who is controlling the Ukraine is, and now I'm following the words of Brzezinski, has the control over Eurasia and has the control about the way from Europe to Asia. This makes the Ukraine so important for the NATO alliance and for all the military activists. What is the alternative? For me, the long-term alternative is a neutral Ukraine as a bridge between East and West, what it historically always was. The actual point for me is that we say, yes, every of the negotiations, every of the discussions are much better than to shoot and then to go for war. So we need a back to diplomacy. But this means that we have to strengthen, in opposite to NATO, the OSCE as a civilian possibility where all the European parties and countries are sitting together at one table and have to negotiate about this. We have to have the political solution on the basis of Minsk II. We have to, and this is, we need ceasefire for all the times at these borders, and we have to withdraw the troops from both sides. Maybe 50 kilometers, 100 kilometers, that we have a little bit so-called military-free zone. In general, we have to come back to the policy of common security. Our policy, our security is never secure when the security of the other side is not also safe. Security is only to get in a package, a double package or not. That is the key point where we have to go. And this needs, in this critical situation we have now, much more activities of the peace movement. I'm happy that I can announce that we had in Germany the first demonstration over the weekend, that we launched together an appeal for the peace in Ukraine and get more than 1,000 signatures in the first 10 hours after we launched the appeal. We had other actions in other countries. We need more actions, more common activities in Europe, more common activities with the peace friends in Ukraine and in Russia. And I think all of us should gather together for a big anti-NATO peace demonstration in Madrid. I think these are some of my ideas. Hopefully we can deepen the ideas in the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much indeed, Reiner, and thanks for the depth of your analysis and the information you're sharing with us. It's absolutely essential because, as you rightly say, we're not getting that kind of information in our media, certainly not here in Britain. And it's very, very good to hear how the movement in Germany is organising and mobilising. And I share your aspiration for a very big demonstration in Madrid, but also perhaps common actions elsewhere against this very, very dangerous situation. So thank you very much. Next, we turn to Nina Potarska. Welcome, Nina. Thank you for joining us. You are Ukraine National Coordinator for the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, or WILPF, as we call it over here. I'm personally a big fan of WILPF, and I know we have some WILPF members in the audience, so we're very happy to welcome you. So, Nina, over to you.
Thank you for invitation, and this couple of weeks, even months, I try to participate in many discussions around the heated up in the situation in Ukraine. And for me, it's always interesting how we can follow through all these risks to be together with some of these parts. Because for me, like a person who are working with a civil society, with a women peace builders, with a lot of traits in our direction, because we are feel the stigmatization of any peace talks, and of course we feel how it's difficult to promote peace and demilitarization in a time when your country in this situation, and it's really difficult to promote demilitarization if you are waiting for attack from any side. And of course, I want to say like thank you for the good analysis about the forces and situation around the border, because Ukraine is a buffer zone between NATO and Russia. And of course, all our history and all our conflict related to this position, like geographical position, political position, and I really don't want to support any of this side, because I feel that Ukraine now it's like a battlefield for big game, and we like a civil society and we like ordinary people just playing in this game, and we don't want to play this. And we understand all this harm on the personal level, and we are working with a woman in a rural area from grassroots organization, and we understand how all these harm and threats we receive from this situation. But I haven't any idea how we can cope with this and how we can solve with this without support of international society. But of course, I understand that, for example, the movement No to NATO related to the situation of which has a roots with the Cold War period. And of course, all these talks around to NATO or no to NATO or against Russia, or maybe it's a NATO organize this situation to like just irritate Russia. But now for me, it's not really important, because we faced with everyday problems, and we faced with everyday dehumanization, and of course it's time to find the way through all these like big stones, because I always afraid to slip into the one side, because if we are talking about peace, it's called like a Ruski mir, Russia peace, our Russia word. So we always close to this tricky rhetoric if we are trying to build any peace approach. And I really don't know, and maybe after we can discuss together with everybody and maybe through your question, because I can see 75 participants and I really appreciate that you decide to spend this time tonight to discuss this question. And of course, this is a problem not just around Ukraine, because Ukraine, it's the same problem with Georgia, with any country in the border between NATO and Russia. So I just want to stress your attention on human security dimension, because we start from the general things, from the economical things and political things, but of course it's in my dimension, it's a human dimension, and I'm always in touch with the people who face with problems, like very basic problems with food, with income, with even domestic violence, because the level of stress and aggression in the society, it's extremely high. And we feel how it's affect our economical in many ways. It's fuel prices, it's any prices this time rises, and it's of course affected every household and every person. So everybody are now just frustrated and just trying to find a way how to cope with this situation. And of course, from my position, even it's difficult to talk about demilitarization, but after every next day we receive new delegation from European countries who are suggesting new loans to buy new weapons. So of course, your governments, it's your business, and you know how to push and stop your governments to do this, because to the number of this kind of help, it's a fleet of Ukraine, and I think we in the next years, I don't know what we can do with all these weapon, gun, and so on. So thank you for your intention, and maybe I will back with answering to your question. And I want to open this floor also for another one participant from Ukraine.
Thank you very much indeed, Nina. Thank you for that very powerful statement of the essential need for real human security. I mean, that's very strong, and I'm sure that is something that we all support. And I know our hearts go out to you this evening, you know, for the experience that you and other citizens of Ukraine are experiencing at the moment. So we send our love to you. So our next speaker is Yuri Sheliazhenko. Yuri is a peace journalist and a doctor of law. He's chair of the Ukraine chapter of War Resisters International. He's a board member of the European Bureau for Conscientious Objection and a director of World Beyond War. Yuri, over to you.
Dear friends, thank you for coming and for supporting peace in Ukraine and around the world. We are thrilled and inspired by vigorous actions of global peace movement. In the United States, you know, this Code Pink, and in Europe against the war with Russia and for peace in Ukraine. And of course, war in Eastern Ukraine continues during 8 years and took thousands of lives, deprived millions of their home and normal life. As Ukraine became battlefield of the new Cold War between the United States and Russia, our peaceful life was torn apart by militant domestic nationalism and both competing imperialisms. Russia is amassing troops on their territory near the Ukrainian border, while NATO increases its presence near and around Ukraine. And there are signs that Ukrainian armed forces, encouraged by military aid and political support of United States and NATO, are preparing to regain control over Donbass by force. President Volodymyr Zelensky, elected after promising peace, stated that peace should be on our terms. And shut down pro-Russian media in Ukraine. Like his predecessor, Poroshenko blocked Russian social networks and pushed official language law, forcibly excluding Russian from public sphere. Zelensky's party, so-called servant of the people, committed to increase military spending to 5% of GDP. In 2022 budget, they increased military spending to 6% of GDP, and they planned 10 international military drills. And they agreed to NATO military bases in Ukraine. With majority in parliament, presidential political machine concentrates political power in Zelensky team's hands and multiplies militarist laws, such as draconian punishments for evaders from conscription and creation of new national resistance force, increasing personnel of armed forces more than 100,000 of men, creating military units in local governments for mandatory military training without any exception for objectors for the reasons of conscience. Human rights refuse to kill of millions of people. They train they aim to mobilize whole population in the case, in this fairy tale case of Russian aggression, of war with Russia. According to annual report Conscientious Objection in Europe 2020, those who refuse to kill have a little chance to legal recognition and protection of their beliefs during conscription in Ukraine and in Russia too. It is post-Soviet legal nihilism and no respect for human rights. Not to say separatist People's Republic also have no alternative service arrangement, no respect to human right, to conscientious objection to military service. Alternative non-military service arrangements in Ukraine are hardly accessible, discriminatory, and punitive in nature. We heard many fairy tales about red lines of all sorts, when global leaders recklessly exchange threats to use military force and to wage economic war against each other in their claims, if their claims will not respected. Both so-called great powers wish to own Ukraine and claim their right to concentrate their deadly weapons, troops, and bases wherever they wish, as near to each other as they wish. Such claims not only contradict each other, but blatantly cross red lines of common sense. Nobody has a right to hold a gun or nuke to another's head. Why not? Why not, I say, withdraw red lines of people of the world for so-called great powers? First, no militarization and arms race by the cost of welfare, human rights, and environmental harmony. Second, nationalism and imperialism should step aside for development of inclusive, diverse, and fair democracy. Third, all conflicts should be settled peacefully. Any buildup of structural violence is intolerable, especially talking about war preparation to war or threats of war. These red lines of common sense are commonly overstepped. The situation indeed is grave because political signals from the sides of United States, NATO, Ukrainian and Russian governments give impression of readiness to escalate armed conflict in eastern Ukraine. NATO's war machine prepares its wars for a long time. United States alone wastes $650 billion on greedy, bloodthirsty Pentagon and 10 times less on foreign relations. Diplomacy is unnecessary when NATO enforces reckless geopolitical hegemony. Hegemony of United States. They need no friends. They need enemies to destroy and loot. It seems they will do anything to make enemies for themselves. Violent regime change, funding of neo-Nazi and their pseudo-moderate supporters, assault on peace-loving and pacifist activists, shameless advertising of war and hatred to neighboring Russia, violent nationalism, and undermining peace process and lying through corrupted experts on TV screens and paid mobs on the streets against Minsk agreements, lying that peace is surrender. Therefore, Ukrainians and Russians should fight for a last drop of blood. They even shoot disgusting war film outside the wire, depicting endless violence in Ukraine turned into wasteland. And indeed, we gathered today to discuss such a grim topic as Ukraine, the next NATO war. And imagine what Ukrainians feel when we think about it. Imagine your home on the place of Ukraine turned into battlefield. Horrible, isn't it? And unimaginable for the most of people. Kyiv International Institute of Sociology regularly published surveys of public opinion. And these surveys say a lot about people's attitude to war effort. On the question formulated, quote, should the accumulation of Russian troops on the border with Ukraine be perceived as a real threat of invasion of Ukraine in the winter and spring of 2022? Unquote. 39% of respondents replied, no, there will be no invasion. The majority of respondents, 57%, believe that the government's diplomatic efforts are insufficient. Also, sociologists asked what actions are Ukrainians ready to take in the event of Russian armed intervention in their settlement. Most of people responded they would not do anything or resort to nonviolent resistance. Only 33% of respondents ready for armed resistance. Ukrainian pacifist movement adopted the statement concerning current situation, which I will read now for conclusion. The people of our country and the entire planet are in mortal danger due to the nuclear confrontation between the civilizations of East and West. We need to stop the build-up of troops, the accumulation of weapons and military equipment in and around Ukraine, the insane throwing of taxpayers' money into the furnace of the war machine instead of solving acute socio-economic and environmental problems. We need to stop indulging the cruel whims of military commanders and oligarchs who profit from bloodshed. Ukrainian pacifist movement condemns the preparation of Ukraine and NATO member states for war against Russia. We demand global de-escalation and disarmament, dissolution of military alliances, elimination of armies and borders that divide people. We demand immediate peaceful settlement of the armed conflict in eastern Ukraine around Donetsk and Luhansk on the basis of absolute compliance with a ceasefire by all pro-Ukrainian and pro-Russian combatants and strict adherence to the package of measures for the implementation of the Minsk agreements approved by United Nations Security Council Resolution 2202/2015. Withdrawal of all troops, cessation of all supplies of weapons and military equipment, Russian for separatists, Western for warmongering Ukrainian government, cessation of total mobilization of the population for war, cessation of propaganda of war and hostility between civilizations in the media and social networks, conducting open, inclusive and comprehensive negotiations on peace and disarmament in the format of a public dialogue between all state and non-state parties to the conflict, conflict with the participation of pro-peace civil society actors, enshrining neutrality of our country by the Constitution of Ukraine, joining treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons, guaranteeing the human rights to conscientious objection to military service, including refusal to be trained for military service in accordance with Article 18 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights and paragraphs 2 and 11 of the General Comment number 22 of the UN Human Rights Committee. War is a crime against humanity. Therefore, we are determined not to support any kind of war and to strive for the removal of all causes of war. Finally, thank you for attention to our peace-loving message. People in Ukraine, as well as people throughout the world, does not want war. Let's unite our voices to show that our great powers are not war machines, bellicose sovereigns, and great powers of East and West. Let's show that our great powers are in our hearts. Let's show that our great powers are truth and love, and we will not tolerate tyranny of war machine. Let's say together, we want peace. Let's leaders here, the people of Earth, demand universal peace, nothing less.
Thank you very much indeed, Yuri, and thank you particularly for that very rousing conclusion and the message I was taking there, unity for peace. You know, that's what we're all about. So thank you so much for that very, very detailed presentation. So I know people are asking where can they read that. The declaration you were reading at the end, if you have a link, could you put that in the chat? And of course, also, Kristine is recording this discussion, these presentations, and you'll be able to watch that back on the No to War, No to NATO website very soon. So people want to refresh their minds with what you're saying, go into the detail more again, friends, that will be available very shortly. So big thank you to our speakers. So we now have some time for questions and discussion. So I'm going to ask everybody, well, first of all, you will need, if you want to ask a question or make a short contribution, you need to raise your hand, and you need to do that electronically because people are crossing 4 screens and there's no way I can see you if you put your hand up like that. So you have to go to the bottom of your screen where it says reactions. It may be somewhere else on your device, but go to the screen, bottom of the screen where it says reactions, and then raise your hand electronically, and then I will see you in the order in which you are putting up your hands. So please indulge me. Do not put your hands up manually, put them up electronically. And then please ask questions, because we have expert speakers ask questions, please. If you want to make a short contribution, like 2 or 3 minutes, that's really great. We want to hear from everybody, but we have limited time because it's quite late in Ukraine, so we're not going to be on the call forever. So please do be disciplined about how long you're going to speak for. So with all that said, now the floor is open, and so I'm going to take a few contributions, then I'm going to ask the speakers if they want to come back on those. They don't have to. But if they want to answer any direct questions, then hopefully we'll have time for 2 or 3 rounds of several questions and contributions, and then the speakers will have the chance to respond more fully at the end. So I can see Joan Russo, I think. Over to you.
Hi. I'm from Victoria, Canada, and you know Canada is very much involved, and Canada does whatever the US does, Canada follows. And so I think I was going to ask first a question, and then I'd just like to make a comment. I think that that we should try to contact a non-aligned state and to take NATO to the International Court of Justice. I know the US doesn't belong, but all the other NATO, US has not respected the court as soon as there was a decision against it years ago when it was taken there by Nicaragua. But the other NATO states do, and especially Canada. So it'd be lovely to see them going this was done by Yugoslavia in 1999, but I think it needs to be done again. And I think one of the reasons they should be taken there is because of the NATO's very provocative Defender Europe with its activities going on all the time and with the US presence everywhere. And I think that has been so provocative, and I think that should be dismantled, and we should call for the dismantling of that immediately. And I noticed that the common security was used to justify Defender NATO. But common security, as you all know, was coined by Olof Palme in 1982. And he said that no one is secure unless all are secure. Well, what Defender Europe has done is turn it upside down and say no one is insecure until everyone is insecure. This is just turning it upside down completely. So I was just going to suggest that, because I was at the international course in 1999, and I couldn't stand to see most of the countries, including Canada, stand before it and say, we do not respect your jurisdiction.
Thank you very much indeed, Jo. That's very useful points for the discussion. I'm now going to turn to Heidi Meinzold. Heidi, unmute yourself and fire away.
Yeah, thank you. I think we can all agree that NATO has not the answers needed for the moment. But I see even a bigger problem at the moment in these think tanks fueling, political think tanks fueling the conflict. And the recent article that I read in the German Foreign Policy, for example, is just crazy, because there is no attention to any of the fears that both our Ukrainian friends have mentioned. Nothing about it's a total ignorance of what makes a human being safe and feel safe somehow, and the threats of poverty, health, environmental disasters. And I think what civil society really has to do now, not just criticize NATO, but really raising the voices on this complexity of security for us as human beings. And I think we are so many, and we can raise our voices in this direction. And I really hope that we are not trapped by just these global power machineries and the war machineries, but really look on what makes the people have a life in dignity. Thank you.
Thanks very much indeed, Heidi. That's very powerful. Now I'm going to turn to Ray Street. Welcome, Ray. Unmute yourself and share your thoughts with us.
Oh, thank you, Kate, and thank you for a brilliant analysis from Reiner this morning. He gathered everything in and gave us lots of facts, and from our brave friends in the Ukraine who stand for peace. It's wonderful to hear them. I want to suggest something it may have been thought of, I don't know, but I want to suggest that for our counter summit in Madrid, that we have I'm going to say powerful workshop on common security and remind people about the OSCE and the Helsinki Declaration in 1975. because these things, as everybody's pointed out this morning, are not covered at all in our Western press. Our papers in the UK, I don't know about other people in Western Europe, are drenched with, you'd think there's actually a war happening. And of course they ignore where there is a war happening, say in the Yemen, and we get pages and pages, even in the supposedly left-wing newspapers, such as our national one called The Guardian. It's not actually that left-wing. And there's only one small newspaper here, which does report the truth, the Morning Star, which some of you may know in other countries. But so that's why I thought at the Counter Summit in Madrid, we could have a big workshop on the OSCE and common security, which we've talked about in this today and before. Thank you.
Thanks very much indeed, Ray. And I'm sure that our speakers will come back on that suggestion you've made, that proposal, when they make their comments. And now I'm going to call Tord Bjork. Could you put your camera on, please, so we can see you, as well as you've unmuted yourself. So Tord, over to you.
Unfortunately, my camera, there's something technically wrong. I don't know what it is. I hope you can hear me. No problem.
No problem. We can hear you loud and clear. Go ahead.
I think this is a most welcome webinar, and especially I greet our friends Nina and Yuri from Ukraine. This is so utterly important. I have one question and one comment. I see it is of extreme importance to look upon this conflict we have, not only in geopolitical terms. One term has been very strongly addressed, is the human dimension. I think this is very important, but there is also a social ecological dimension to this conflict. And what we do need is to combine different efforts, because we can see very clearly that there is no part in this conflict who really have a solution to the daily life problems, which is linked to what kind of agriculture, what kind of industrial development can give a life worth living for Ukrainians or Russians or people in Eastern Europe. And here I would say we have to look upon the situation as that the peace and environmental movement is the same movement. And here we do have a possibility to move forward and look upon the situation in terms of we have at the same time promote another kind of development in all the countries and oppose the repression against the independent movements in Russia, in Ukraine, in the European Union. And this, I would say, that Women's International League for Peace and Freedom was able already in '72 at the first UN Conference on Environment, where Ingrid Segerstedt-Wiberg, the chair of Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, made the environmental movement understanding the need of opposing atomic power. And we can see it that recently in November, Women's International League of Peace and Freedom in Norway organized a Nordic Russian webinar, including the environmental movement in Russia and peace movement in Russia, opposing at the same time the repression in Russia, which is growing, we know that, and many who have contacts with the West are labeled foreign agents, and in Scandinavia, and I guess that is very much so all over Europe, we as peace or independent environmental movements who wants to have contact with Russia are labeled Russian disinformation agents. So there are several ways of approaching this, and I would see that this is an enormously important step, this webinar and the Peace Summit in Madrid. And I also welcome you to the Stockholm +50 webinar and meetings in June, early June, which is celebrating 50 years of struggle united between environmental peace and social justice movement. Thank you very much. And I hope this, I wonder from all the ones who are speaking from Ukraine and Reiner, if this is an important contribution to link human, ecological, and pacifist concerns.
Thanks very much, Tord. And I certainly share that view. I think that's a very important strand to the discussion. Now, before I call on the next audience members who've indicated, that's Heike and Pat, I just want to check in with the speakers and see if they want to make any preliminary responses to the questions and discussion that's been put there. Yuri, do you want to say anything or respond quickly to any points now?
I have a response to all speakers. First of all, to Ray Street, thanks for solidarity. I love that you call people of Ukraine our brave friends. Great. To Heidi Manzold, I agree that corrupted think tanks mislead people and decision makers, but NATO is part of this system. How can we criticize Russian military and not criticize NATO? All military alliances, Russia, China, United States, and European militant democracies, any military alliance is guilty. NATO is part of the system of militarized economics of structural violence, including patriarchy and oppression of women. By the way, military registration of women was introduced in Ukraine, and educated professional women are first targets. They are discriminated, and housewives are spared for now. Hope for it will be held. This system of violence is aimed solely to extort taxes and spend it on weapons and armies, on bloodshed for profits of merchants of death. Tord Bjork is absolutely right. Peace movement needs solidarity and cooperation with environmental justice movement, social justice movement, with human rights defenders, and with the world federalists. To John Russo, yes, collective security is broken, so we need to organize common security by non-violent means. As for taking NATO accountable, brave idea. As a lawyer, I understand it is impossible in the current system of international law because, you know, some people tried to do that, and European Court for Human Rights absolved NATO, unfortunately. So maybe we have an option like Bertrand Russell and other thinkers who created a tribunal of the people to make a moral judgment. Maybe we need such people's trial on NATO's crimes. Maybe. Let's think about it.
Thanks very much, Yuri. Nina, do you want to say anything at this moment?
I think I have nothing to add. Just maybe we need to continue and trying to find some, maybe, I don't know, be more creative to create something, how we can stop.
Okay, thank you. That's
thank you.
Thank you. That's a very clear point. Reiner, over to you. Any quick responses there?
Thank you, Kate. I really would like to answer 2 points. First, when we really speak about NATO, then we always should have in mind that NATO is not a North Atlantic military alliance. It's the biggest worldwide military alliance, including Asia and other parts of the world, also including Africa. So it is much bigger than every historical military alliance ever was. And this makes the question of overcoming NATO so difficult. And this means for me that we should not discuss that we should discuss more about social welfare and these claims. Yes, but social welfare, social security, human security is always the opposite of NATO and NATO politics. NATO is absolutely the opposite of all of that. And that is the key point that I think a campaign for overcoming NATO is so important. Can you imagine what we can do with these 1.1 trillion US dollars NATO is spending every year? When we are speaking about environmental development, about climate justice, for all this, we need the money we are spending now for NATO. So NATO is a key point. Even when I know when it's not so easy to discuss it in the country, we as a peace movement have to do it. And that brings me to the second point, and I'm very happy that Ray mentioned it so clearly, the question of common security. What is the political alternative to the actual situation of confrontation and war? And let me say some words to war. You know, people, politicians, media are speaking so easy. We are next to a war. A war will come. Do they know about what they are speaking? In this region, Central Europe, we have 15 nuclear power plants. We have about 80 huge chemical industrial complexes. What will happen when they will be destroyed? The whole area will be without people. This is Chernobyl, Fukushima, multiplied by 10. Central Europe is absolutely impossible to make war without making on the same level than using nuclear weapons. That is the reality. And people who are speaking so easy about war, we are going to war. We should immediately follow them into their voices and tell the opposite. That is absolutely impossible to have war. And this means we have to promote common security and to inform shortly about 2 points of common security. First point, we will come out on the 24th of April with a new Olaf Palme report number 2. 40 years after the first report, we will come out. We as the International Trade Unions Confederation, the Olaf Palme Center and International Peace Bureau with a lot of experts, with a new report, which brings its updated common security for our development today, which means the globalization of common security and the regionalization of common security. And hopefully we can discuss this. And my last point, you know, yes, we need more and better ideas, but above all, we need more protest from the people. The key point that we can save peace is that people are protesting and going on the streets. And that is our weakest point. Up to now, I can only see small, engaged protest actions, but not really mass movement. We need Iraq movement again. That is a challenge we are facing. And my hope to this webinar is that we can give a little bit spirit to do more actions in the different parts of the world, in the different cities, locations, wherever you are. We need more actions. And then this is the only possibility we can change this dramatic, dangerous situation.
Thanks very much, Reiner. I absolutely agree with you 100% there. So now we're going to go to our second round of questions and comments. I'm just going to read one that Helga has put from WILPF has put in the chat, so I don't lose it as more people contribute. She says, I have a question for Nina. What do you think could be support for the women in Ukraine, and in particular for the internal refugee women who still return to the war zone to harvest their gardens, to feed the family? What could be a good sign for them so that they see they are not forgotten? So one particularly for Nina. And now Heike Hensel, over to you. Do put your camera on if you can, but otherwise just speak to us.
Yeah, thanks, Kate, unfortunately, I have the same problem like George. With the mobile phone, I cannot open the camera. I have a little bit of problem with that. But greetings from Germany. And first of all, I would like to thank our Ukrainian friends. It's really good to listen to alternative voices of Ukraine for the first time, I have to say, since 2 months of media propaganda in Germany. And I have 2 questions to you. First of all, at the beginning of Zelensky's presidency, I remember it, there was far more hope for a political resolution. I mean, at least there were prisoner exchanges and I think a more moderate tone. And so my question is, what happened in between that we are now in this tense situation? And secondly, do the people in Ukraine really think there will be a Russian invasion? I didn't get all the figures you mentioned, Yuri, because there are also different signals of Zelensky. It was said in our newspapers that 2 weeks ago he said, "Oh, don't panic," to the Western countries. We are not just in front of a Russian invasion. So it's a little bit a contradiction also how he behaves or what he's saying. So perhaps you could explain a little bit the idea or the acting of your current president. And my last question, how do you assess the use of the Turkish combat drones by the Ukrainian army in I think it was in last autumn? And is there an interest perhaps in recapturing Donbass and even Crimea militarily? Is this perhaps one also of the big problems we are facing? And finally, I fully agree with all the speakers focusing now of the new idea, the new and old idea of common security, to strengthen the idea, I think, of this European house, or House of Europe of Gorbachev, Michael Gorbachev, and we should focus there in order to give a positive idea to the people in whole Europe, how we could really live together, including, of course, Russia in a new security architecture. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Heike. Okay, so Pat Elder, over to you.
Thanks, Kate. I am 2 hours south of Washington, and I have an opportunity to talk to people here through community involvement, and everyone pretty much feels that Russia is being aggressive, and that the United States is defending democracy, and that war is part of the human experience. It's to be expected, and that war is good for the economy, especially in a defense town like this, so-called defense. But of course, these are misconceptions, and so somehow we must do a better job developing alternative media. One example is we have a Facebook page, No to War, No to NATO, and it has 1,600 followers. And yet Joe Gerson and I are the only 2 that are posting on it regularly. So if everyone listening to this could think to post on the thing, it could catch fire. Don't know for sure. But I mean, I agree with Reiner, we got to get people out on the street, but we have a lot of heavy lifting before we're able to do that, at least in this part of the woods. So just one final idea, and it's a little fuzzy, I guess, to you all, but I've had some success spamming people, like through Constant Contact or MailChimp, and you start out with several hundred people, and you'll see a conversation, and there'll be like 30 people, and most of them are maybe Danes and a few Swedes. And they're talking about common defense, and you pick up their emails, and then about bi-weekly you send something out that's really well written and really sharp, and you'll find that only a third will drop off, and you wait a year or 2, and you might have 5,000 or 10,000 people on your list. I mean, just random ideas, folks, but I wish I had more time. You know, I'm concentrating on how the military poisons us, and that seems to be quite a cottage industry lately. So thanks, Kate, and thanks to everyone. I'm with you.
Thanks very much, Pat. And we follow closely over here what you're doing in the States. So, you know, solidarity and, well, hope it goes well. A very difficult situation you're facing there. So our next contribution is from Henning Zerok. Henning, yes. Over to you.
Yes, it's Henning Zerok. You can understand me? I have no picture, the same problem.
No problem, go ahead.
Yes, from Society Culture of Peace. I want only to make some remarks. It was announced that we need more activities in the whole world to go in the streets. We have been in Roma last month, and it was really amazing. The city, remember, we had 1 million flags during the war in Iraq. We could not imagine 1 million flags in one city against the Iraq war. If we would have another emotion like this, we have worked very hard to bring the people behind us. So we also had some activities in other cities, and of course in Berlin, I sent it in the chat. Also there on the 17th and 18th of February activities, because now the parliament have a discussion. Germany plays a big role, I think, in the decision sending arms or not. Is a big discussion and a high pressure from the mass media. We didn't spoke about the mass media. The role of the mass media is very important. And there are the meeting also in Berlin. We also go to the European Parliament because the Europe Parliament plays a big role. My last remark is what we should force is, we know war kills everything and destroy everything. Though we have the movement in the climate, you know, the war kills climate. War produce refugees. War produce power for the poor people. The social question. I think this is the next efforts we should do, that we bring all of the young people from the different social movement together, because if this war or a kind of war will happen, we lose everything in any movements. Though it's not only the question of the peace movement, it's the question of all the social movement to stop now these efforts. And this is why it's important to go to the streets. Thank you. I sent the contact in the chat. Thank you.
Thanks very much indeed, Henning. And I think now is the time. After that second round of contributions, we'll bring in our speakers for the final time. So speakers, if you'd like to answer any questions and make any comments and give us your final concluding remarks. So Yuri, over to you first.
First of all, it is indeed many interesting thoughts, and thank you all. I mainly agree with Reiner that we should act and we should protest actively, but as for must protest, it is a hard thing in Ukraine because these far righters are violently oppose any attempts for show people sentiment for peace. But in Ukraine, it was some meeting near the parliament which demanded to stop war, and on this meetings there was transparency, no war with Russia, and people don't want war. President Zelensky, how dare you to wage war? But in Ukraine we have no mass peace movement, and it is a result of lack of peace education, lack of peace culture. This post-Soviet militarization of society and economy through mandatory military service and a cult of sacred military duty. And of course, it is lack of peace journalism. Henning Zirok rightly said that media lies people that work and miraculously make nation wealthy and happy, and we should develop peace journalism to expose dangers and pains of war. We need well-funded peace education. We need peace journalism to start genuine and numerous peace movement. Heike Hensel, answering to your questions, I will reply shortly. Where hopes for peace gone? Zelensky said that we should put all our trust on armed forces to achieve peace. So hopes gone in this direction. Arrogance just make hopes vanquish. How can I explain Zelensky? He is liar and puppet of war-profiting oligarch Kolomoisky. That's it. That's it. And for regaining Crimea, it is official policy of Ukraine, theoretically by diplomacy. But if someone, give enough funding, enough money for far-righters, for even the state, it act of attempt to regain Crimea via military means is not excluded, because we already had such people who tried to undermine Russian control over Crimea using methods like terrorist methods, and it was, of course, not good. As for final remarks, indeed, I'd like to thank to all peace-loving people who call for peace in Ukraine and around the world, and we are grateful for all those who show solidarity with Ukrainian peace-loving people. But please don't express any support for Ukraine's sovereignty or Russian sovereignty or United States sovereignty or any other sovereignty, because it can be easily misunderstood as expression of solidarity with the military. In global relations, sovereignty is a main obstacle for development of global civil society and lasting peace. Nonsensical claims of absolute sovereignty of great powers and nation states is the main cause of the current crisis. And to say truth, and people of Earth deserve to know the truth, it is not just Ukrainian crisis, it is a crisis of global governance. The planet with a common people connected via numerous networks, with common culture of peace and citizenship, with common market of ideas, labor, and finances, needs strong institutions of social and environmental justice. Our old beloved Mother Earth needs efficient public management, the federal government of the world. But bellicose sovereigns are arrogantly negligent and they fail to satisfy this need of the people on Earth. We need profound reform or abdication of these reckless sovereignties. I said many times, and I will say again, that Ukraine, Donbas, Crimea, Russia, United States, China, East and West, North and South should be indivisible in the one united world without borders and armies.
Thanks very much indeed, Yuri. That's a great vision you have there. So let's see how we can work together to move in the direction that you're outlining. So before I turn to our next speaker for the final remarks, I can draw your attention, please, to the chat where Christina has put some important links, notably, for example, the registration link for joining the next Peace Summit discussion meeting. That's an organising meeting on the 22nd of Feb. So if you want to get involved with the Peace Summit for Madrid, please register for that. Kristine has also put a link to subscribe to the No to NATO list, so you can keep up to date with everything that we're doing. So please, please do that. And also, Kristine has just put the subscribe to our list, Women Against NATO, as well. There's a Women Against NATO list as well. So please do sign up to those. So Nina, over to you for your final responses and remarks. Are you with us, Nina? I think we may have lost Nina. Christina, can you see her there? No? Okay, well, that's a shame. Hopefully she may come back in before the end, but if not, I know we all extend our thanks and solidarity greetings to Nina for her work in Ukraine. So Reiner, then, over to you for the final remarks and to finish the webinar, please.
Thank you, Kate. And let me say three things at the end. First of all, I got one question which I would like to answer. That is the question which is also transported in our mass media day to day. Every country should join every alliance the country wants. So Ukraine could join also NATO. That is, for me, it is propaganda. First of all, it could be, but it must not be. There are countries which are not joining military alliances and are very successful countries. Look to Finland, Austria. Second, when you are looking to the agreement of the Istanbul OSCE summit and the Astana OSCE summit, both said that by the security issues, you should not only take into account your security, but also the security of the other side. Consolidate their security at the expense of the security of another state is not allowed. So we also have to take into account what is with Ukraine and what is with Russia. And so the neutrality is the only option for such a country as a bridge builder between the two sides. I think this is a very important point. I'm not so visionary tonight like Yuri, but I love these visions. But you know, visions need the next steps. And for me, the next steps are to go further for non-violent actions. And I really would underline all actions are important. I'm a big friend of big mass actions, but every small actions, every protest, every letter to a newspaper where we are protesting against the reports, everything is important and needed. The discussion with the neighbor, the discussion in the family, at school, at university. We need much more public discussion from our side against the propaganda of the other side. I think this is the key challenge. And when at the end, we have also mass protests on the street, that is great. So that is my vision for the next time, because I really would like to underline, we are not in a situation where we are speaking war could happen. We are really in the most dangerous situation of peace and war in the world since '62. And maybe some of you remember how your parents were reacting in the situation of '62, how fearful they were that it's really coming to an end. And we are not in the same, but we are in a situation where with provocation, with actions and reactions, we could very quick go away to war. And this war will be at the end a war with nuclear weapons. This means we really have the big need to think and to work more for peace and to do everything to develop an atmosphere in the society where the war-oriented powers in the society will be not successful. I think this is the challenge. And I'm deeply thankful that we could discuss it tonight. And for me, Madrid is a point where hopefully we all meet each other, can continue on the counter summit, the peace summit, and protest together on the streets for Yuri's one world in peace and global justice.
Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Reiner. I mean, that's terrific. And I absolutely, that unity message, the peace and unity, the solidarity message I'm getting from all of you speakers. Personally, I've learned a huge amount this evening about Ukraine. We've had a very human message, very human story from Ukraine. And the idea of a war taking place there, or indeed anywhere, but a war in Ukraine would be absolutely disastrous. A war in that part of the world, as you say, Reiner, escalating to nuclear war. It's too terrible to contemplate. It would be a catastrophe, potentially leading to annihilation. So we have to do everything we can together, collectively, to prevent that war taking place. We're up against huge forces. The balance of forces is not in many ways in our favor, but there are huge numbers of people who wish to have peace, who wish to work for peace, not only in the region, but globally too. So let's do everything we can together to prevent that war. There are many ways in which we can work together on that, and our speakers have outlined some of them, but certainly the No to War, No to NATO network is 100% committed to preventing that war and supporting and generating actions bringing people together to prevent that war. So please, everybody, I know you're all probably engaged in many peace activities and many organizations and movements, but please, through those means, do everything you can to ensure peace and justice for Ukraine. Thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.